Hello, everybody.
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
Welcome back. So it has been a minute since we have been together.
Yes.
And we're in new digs.
Yes.
So that's what's taken us a while to do this again. Got all set up here actually at Home Base Alpha.
Yeah.
So
undisclosed bunker location for all you
here at the
P1s.
mothership.
Yeah.
But today, I believe Eric are very excited about today. So ever since we had the idea to do this podcast, the one thing I said is like, I want a meteorologist. Right. I really want a meteorologist. And so the timing could not be better. I think we all dodged a bullet with the storm last night, but we are very fortunate to have Brian Hoeth with us today, a meteorologist.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
So he is with the National Weather Service, and I'm going to let him explain all the things he's done because, and I'll get wordy here a little bit, but instead of just kicking it to you.
No,
but
not you.
I think everybody has kind of the common misconception that, you know, you got Delkus and Femproc and the guys on TV, and those are the only meteorologists. But there's a ton of other stuff out there that has to do with the weather and what you do. And obviously your resume and bio speaks volumes for that. So I'm really excited to hear, you know, beginning to end, and also a good ag, by the way, Gig'em.
Oh, hey, Gig'em.
So Brian, thanks for being here, and take it.
All right. Well, pleasure's all mine. And yeah, it's so funny when I meet people for the first time and tell them I'm a meteorologist. Of course, the first thing they say is, "Are you on TV?" And I'm like, no, I've got a face for radio, clearly. So it's kind of weird. I definitely stumbled into meteorology. I wasn't one of those typical people that, you know, I always knew I wanted to be a meteorologist. When I was a kid, some weather event made me geek out, and I wanted to be a weather person. So I went to college, didn't know what I wanted to do. I was 18, young, you know, all I care about at that age is money, right? Yeah. I just knew I was good at math, and I was like, let me try engineering. So went to school originally for engineering, and just found out after a year, I was like, this is not for me. It doesn't interest me. It's boring. I like the math and science part, but the engineering, not so much. And so I literally sat down my sophomore year in college, opened up the college catalog book. You know, back in the day, things weren't online. And I'm flipping the pages. Meteorology, that sounds interesting. Because I wanted to do something where I could still apply the math and science. So for all of you people that are out there that want to be meteorologists, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but you better be good at math and science. Because
man,
I know.
So I'm going to stick with roofing.
Yeah,
I'm going to stick with roofing then.
As my wife says, I don't math.
Exactly.
But yeah, long story short, I ended up getting
just picked it out of a catalog and said, I'm going to do that.
I literally was like, boop, that's for me. And so I started taking meteorology, fell in love with it. I got what's called a pre-meteorology degree, which is kind of like pre-law or pre-med, which means basically you got to go to school more.
Yeah. So what do you do if you were not to go on to get, I guess, essentially, is it your master's?
Yeah. So I went and got my master's in meteorology at Texas A&M. Whoop.
Yeah. So what if you don't get your master's? What would you have done with it?
Sure. Yeah. Since I went to a school that originally wasn't, it wasn't, you know, known for its meteorology program. For my undergrad, I went to Ohio University, or as I like to joke with the Oklahoma people, the real OU.
Oh, there it is.
Man.
But anyways, I went there, and I just, you know, went there originally, and they didn't have a full-fledged meteorology program at the time. They do now. But yeah, there's plenty of schools out there that you can get jobs as a meteorologist with just an undergrad degree in meteorology or atmospheric sciences. And, but I just, at the time, I knew I was going to have to keep going to school and with that pre-meteorology degree. And so went to A&M, got my master's in meteorology, and I still didn't really know what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And this job came open with a NASA contractor in Houston doing weather software. And I was by no means a software programmer, but I just took a leap of faith and I just went for it. And I parlayed it into an amazing career, to be, you know, just kind of shorten things. But I ended up working there at NASA as a contractor for a while, and then got on with the National Weather Service with a outfit there at NASA and Johnson Space Center. And we did the space shuttle landing weather forecasts. I still kind of shake myself that I lucked into it. But as I tell people, if you work hard and you treat people right, you know, good things happen. You know,
that's right.
It's just kind of where it led me. And then, so I did that for a while, and I have the kind of famous thing that I can tell my grandkids that I was the lead forecaster for the very last space shuttle mission.
Wow.
That's unreal.
So impressive.
Yeah. So talk about that a little bit. I mean, what all were you doing? And then the last one, I mean, did you obviously assume you knew it was the last one? And what all went into that?
Yeah. So I started out, like I said, doing the programming side of things. And then I did what was called a techniques development meteorologist, which ironically, I'm about to transition back to a job like that. But I was taking the science and transitioning it into operations for our forecasters. I was doing a little bit of forecasting, but I was more on the science to operations, research to operations transition side. And then I did a little bit of upper wind forecasting for the engineers that had to analyze, the shuttle was going to go up into the atmosphere and experience these winds. But then when I became a lead forecaster, I was it. And it was pretty crazy because, I was the one basically telling whether the weather was go or no go for launch or landing. And so it was very high pressure. But I kind of thrived on
a tad
the
bit of
pressure.
stress.
Yeah. So it was still, like I said, still kind of pinched myself that I was hanging out with astronauts and flight directors.
That's unreal.
When was that?
Yeah. So I was, let's see, I started out in 98 doing the programming stuff. And then by the time I became a lead forecaster, it was 2006 through 2011. So, and then the last shuttle mission, we knew ahead of time. And it wasn't like they picked me because I was the best forecaster. I just, got stuck in the rotation as the one to do the last mission. And so again, just fortunate. And it was one of those days or missions where launch was just terrible weather. And so we were like scrubbing, which means like you try to launch, the weather's terrible. All right, we got to scrub for today, try for tomorrow. And then the best part was the landing was like super quiet. The weather was amazing. And so we could really just soak in the experience.
Wow.
And it was like, this is the end of the space shuttle program. Like, this is crazy. And so we could all, like, we had a team of us, of course, and we were all able to just say like, wow, like, this is it. And this is so cool.
Yeah. I mean, we're all roughly the same age. I mean, I'm sure we all remember kids, they would put the launches on TV at school and like the whole school would shut down. It was such a big deal. And for it to go away and you to be a part of it.
Yeah.
That's really incredible.
It really is.
So question about that. I mean, you said really bad weather. So what was the main thing that would prohibit a launch? Is it wind? Is it lightning?
Yeah, you name it. It was kind of very restrictive because the shuttle's coming in. So we didn't do the launch weather. That was done by the Air Force. We did landing. So on a launch day, we were actually forecasting for abort landing scenarios in case something went wrong on launch. But at the end of the mission, we were kind of, prime time for the shuttle coming back from space. But anyways, so it was an aviation forecast, but on steroids. So we really had very stringent standards as far as like crosswinds, headwinds, tailwinds. You could only have like a 15 knot crosswind, which is not that much.
It's nothing, right?
I know. And then we could not have any showers, even a rain shower within 20 nautical miles. And you're trying to land in Florida. It's like the lightning capital of
just rains kind of all the time a little bit there.
And so it was tough. And then of course, even cloud decks, aviation wise, you need to have that visibility. And so, any cloud decks that were at a certain height, they had to scrub that for that as well.
So when you say scrub, that's just, it's canceled. Like you just have to
postpone
it. Better luck tomorrow, guys.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
At the end of the mission, we really wanted to land in Florida, but if it came down to it and it was like, this is our last day that we have enough supplies and fuel and just everything, then we would just go to California. There was a landing site in California. So we were forecasting for Florida, California, even New Mexico. And then on a launch day, we were worried about European sites. It was crazy.
Oh my gosh. Wow. What a gig.
I know.
Well, I think we could probably spend a whole hour talking about that. But we'll go into more of what you do now and what that looks like.
Yeah. So after the shuttle program, they had to figure out what to do with us misfits, I say, that were at the Spaceflight Meteorology Group. So we got fortunate that the Weather Service, National Weather Service, was firing up these pilot projects to kind of expand on our decision support services, customize weather services for folks. And they spun up a regional operations center here at the regional headquarters in Fort Worth. And so our region covers from New Mexico all the way to Florida up to Tennessee. It's a giant region. Wow. And so there's a lot of folks to support. We support mainly FEMA and also state of Texas emergency management personnel as far as weather briefings are concerned.
And is that just with regard to emergency response and having people on the standby ready to go?
Yeah, it's focused primarily. My title is technically emergency response specialist. And so we're focused on the big weather events, not just, 20% chance of rain. That's done by our local forecast offices.
I got that handled for you.
Yeah,
I'm amateur meteorologist.
The iPhone has that. Everybody has that. So yeah, we're focused on the big events, and we leave all the tough forecasting to the folks that are the ones issuing, like the National Weather Service has issued your tornado warning. Like, that's not me. There's a forecast office north of downtown that does all the really hard work. And I tell people I'm more of a puzzle piece putter togetherer. So I take all the local forecasts and present it on a regional scale. And so they don't have to click on 27 websites and try to figure it all out.
Okay.
So I've been doing that for 13 years, ever since the shuttle program ended in 2011, 13 and a half years. And so, but next week is my last week on that job, which is pretty crazy. Oh. And I'll be transitioning back to a techniques development meteorologist, but I'll be doing it for the whole southern region now, where I'm trying to take new, latest and greatest technology and research and transition it to our field offices, the ones doing all the hard work, and get that into their operations. Wow.
So along the lines, I'll kind of segue into it, technology, right? I mean, you said it, on our cell phones, you can follow radars and all this stuff now. I mean, how much change have you seen in your career, and how much more reliable is it today than it was back in 06, 08?
It's insane, especially from like what we rely on, which is the data, right? Like, not just model forecasts that simulate the atmosphere, but like the radar data. It's gotten so much better, such higher resolution. And so we can talk about it later, but there's algorithms now that are in the radar data where we can look at a certain product and say, that's hail, that's rain, that's big hail. And it's pretty cool. Like, that never existed even,
Brian was sending me maps last night with storms going. He's like, that's big hail. The yellow is big hail.
Yeah. And where was it? In Granbury, where it verified, so that never even used to exist. So it's mind blowing. And the resolution of our forecast models has gone from, used to be like 40-kilometer resolution, which is pretty coarse, to now we've got like down to 12 kilometers, and some of our high resolutions down to 4 kilometers. It's crazy how much better we've gotten. And I get it. We get all the jokes, right? It must be nice to, be wrong all the time and still keep your job.
Still get a paycheck.
And I say, I've basically any job where you have to guess, right? That's my joke to people. I'm a professional weather guesser. Okay. Yeah. I got a degree in this, but, anyone like a sports prognosticator or Wall Street, they guess wrong too. But no, we get it wrong. But it's an inexact science. Mother Nature don't play, right? She's always right, and we just got to kind of go with best guess that we can based on the data.
So you mentioned something like a model forecast. So they talk about the models, and we kind of talked about this earlier before we got started. When you see a cell or you see storms way up northwest, and the model, as the TV guys talk about, it's coming this way, and they can project down, your app has like a 10-day forecast, and you can see all that. How does all that come together? How does all that work?
Yeah, I'll try to summarize it. There's a lot behind it, but basically we have data out there, like live data, right? So whether it's radar data, there's satellites out there sampling the atmosphere. Every day our forecast offices launch weather balloons that go up to 80,000 feet in the atmosphere, and that's all across the country, even across the world. All that data goes into our computer models, right? And so at first it's trying to take a state of the atmosphere. Where are we now? And then through all these fancy equations, it's trying to extrapolate that, or basically say, here's where the weather is now, here's where it's going to be 10 days from now, right? Okay. And, it's really amazing how accurate, we talked about it, how accurate it's gotten. I mean, you're not going to be able to say it's going to rain at my house 10 days from now, 100%, but getting just the large scale weather patterns correct on a 10-day time frame is pretty phenomenal. And one of the things I try to tell people is, to be quite honest, though, the accuracy is still really in that 3-day period, right? Yeah. Anything beyond that is like, it really is kind of a first guess. I try to tell people this preliminary look at what it might look like, but watch the trends. But once you get inside that 3-day period, we're feeling pretty solid about the forecast at that time. And again, it's not like 100% it's going to rain at your house. We're getting it right, but we're getting the overall big picture down to the local level much better.
And, you know, obviously this is a roofing podcast. So
Sure.
that's really important and impactful for us, right? Because, you know, one, we want to know when and where storms are going to be, but from a production standpoint and having to go out and install these roofs, you don't want to open anybody up to the liability of their home flooding. So we watch weather. I mean, we joke about it. We're all amateur weathermen.
Yeah,
Right?
everybody is.
We have to for a number of reasons, but the more accurate things have gotten, the better it is for us. And so that 3-day window, that's really good to know.
Very helpful.
I mean, we watch it weeks in advance, but we really wait as long as we can to make any decisions on what we do. So it's good to know.
It is good to know and to put things into context, right? Like, don't, you know, bet your house on a 5-day forecast. Just, again, watch the trends. That's a first look at what we think it might be. Now we're 4 days out. All right, it's looking better, looking worse. Now we're 3 days out. Okay, we're feeling pretty good. Like you said, maybe you can start to make some staffing plans, decisions based on that 3-day forecast. And then, of course, as we get closer, we're even more confident usually. But yeah, I really, and honestly, it's not as big a deal for y'all, but like winter weather is insanely hard to predict, especially here in North Texas.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's even like, I tell people 3 days, maybe like 3 hours.
Well, all right. So I'm going to dive right into the main question I have. What the hell is the cap?
Yeah.
And why won't it ever break?
Yeah. How can we break that cap?
I know. Well, y'all have some nice caps here. I'm going to grab
one of those is yours, by the way. I
set
set those out. You get your choice.
Okay. So I'll try to explain it in, kind of layman's terms, but really all the cap is it's warm air aloft, meaning maybe 5,000-6,000 feet up in the atmosphere. Okay. Because normally what happens in the atmosphere is you have an air mass that's at a certain temperature. And as you go up in the atmosphere, it cools, right? It gets colder and colder as you go up in the atmosphere. Well, a lot of times we have weather systems that move from west to east, and so they're picking up this warm air mass from Mexico, actually. And that's why we get capped here a lot, is because it's picking up that warm air mass from Mexico. And because they're at a higher elevation than we are here in North Texas, where we're pretty much at sea level, Mexico, it's about 5,000-6,000 feet in the atmosphere, and it's a warm air mass. And so what it's doing is it's basically defying the laws of normal physics, right? Normally, like I said, you go up in the atmosphere and things just cool. And so an air parcel is just allowed to rise and keep going. But the problem with the cap is you have a warmer air mass here than you have here, which you have a denser air mass because it's colder, and it hits that cap and it can't rise anymore because this air mass here is going to keep rising. And so it basically blocks any sort of updrafts from creating thunderstorms. So I don't know if that helped you, but basically it's just a warm air mass. And so how you overcome the cap is you need that surface temperature to warm up. So you might start at like 70 degrees in the morning, right? Well, you might have a cap that's at like 80 degrees, even in the elevated atmosphere, which is crazy. So we've got to get to that about 80 degrees at the surface to kind of match that cap and bust through it.
Okay.
And so I think you're getting to it later, but like, what's an indicator that we might be able to bust the cap? Sunshine, right? How do we warm up? Sunshine. A lot of times when I wake up on a day where they're saying, "Oh, we're gonna get they," I'm a they, right? I'm the they.
You're
I'm
the
the
one
they.
saying it.
Yeah, I'm one of the they now. But severe weather, big chance severe weather, and I'm like, I wake up and there's clouds everywhere. I'm like, it's not so much. It's not that it's not gonna happen, but it's not gonna be one of those big days. It's just not. I mean, you can't get widespread heating, and you need heat. So there's 3 ingredients to even just create a regular thunderstorm. You need moisture, you need instability, and instability is just a difference in heating. So whether you have the warm, moist air coming up and you have the cool, dry air coming at the upper atmosphere, and that's why we get favored for thunderstorms here in North Texas, because you usually get that warm, moist air coming up from the Gulf of Mexico, getting pumped up into here, and we get the cool, dry air coming off the Rocky Mountains. Okay. And so that's why we're kind of
it's all meeting
right here, and that's why we're in Tornado Alley, they call it, right? So that's your instability. If you get enough moisture pumped up from the Gulf of Mexico, that's your second ingredient. And then the third thing you need is lift. So you need something to create that air to lift up in the atmosphere. And that's usually some sort of boundary, like a cold front or a dry line, some sort of difference in, again, temperature or wind shift, where you're creating a convergence zone at the surface that forces that air. It has to go somewhere, right? It has to go up. And so those are the three ingredients that you need.
Wow.
Yeah.
There it is. The cap.
The cap
Finally unmasked.
Yeah. It's the hardest thing because the models aren't really still good at forecasting the cap.
Yeah.
You know, because we can only deal with, and that's why on a severe weather day, like I talked about those weather balloons.
Mm-hmm.
So they launched weather balloons and it's sampling the atmosphere. We're getting temperature and dew point, which tells you how much atmosphere there is, you know, how much moisture is in the atmosphere, and the winds. And so we're able to see like how strong is that cap. And on a severe weather day, we'll launch extra balloons. Like normally they're only launched twice a day, but on a severe weather day, our offices that are in the heat of it, they might launch 3 or 4 different balloons trying to keep like, well, how's that cap doing? How we doing?
So when you say the strength of the cap, is that just based on the temperature?
It's
essentially
it's both. It's how warm it is and how deep it is, right?
Okay.
Depth wise, like how is it 1,000 feet deep? Is it a shallow cap, meaning it's only a couple hundred feet deep, and that's something we can overcome a little bit easier? And how warm is it nosing out?
So what's the average here in North Texas? Is there like an average that we have? Because we seem to hear about the cap all the time, so it feels like it's probably not that light of a cap most of the time. Is there a average
As far as like
the depth of it, or
the
like
depth?
Like,
yeah, so I'd say on average it's anywhere from like 1,000 to 3,000 feet. It's actually pretty thick.
yeah, it's pretty significant to break through or bust through.
Correct.
Okay.
And so on the days where we see, well, it's more shallow, maybe 1,000 feet, maybe only 500 feet, and it's warmer than the surface, but not like significantly warmer.
Okay.
So it's a weaker cap, and it's not as deep. So we're thinking, well, we could probably overcome that. Versus, well, it's pretty warm, it's pretty deep. It's going to be hard to overcome that cap today.
A lot of things have to happen to break
exactly.
So is the cap essentially always around summertime, wintertime? It's more, we hear about it more this time of year because of those fronts pushing in and things like that.
It's more prevalent during the spring and the fall when we have severe weather, because you have those temperature differences, right? You're transitioning between really cold in the winter and really hot in the summer. In the summer, it's just hot. I mean, it's hot from the surface all the way up, right? And in the winter, well, as we know here in the winter, it's not really winter. I'm from Ohio. This is winter. But, you know, you on a normal like winter day, which there aren't any here, but you could have those differences still. But in general, you're going to have kind of cold air all the way up, maybe a little bit of warm here and there. But you need at least some warmth at the surface to even have a chance for severe weather. And so even if you had a cap, it wouldn't matter.
Okay.
You know?
Well, I want to get to hail, but
Yeah.
when you talk about this, I just picture this force field that is preventing hail from hitting in the area. But it takes me back to last summer, and we've talked about this a lot. Last summer, to me, in my lifetime, was the worst summer I can imagine. Now, granted, we're out in it a lot more, so maybe, I don't know, maybe there's been worse, but it was terrible last year. And you couldn't escape the heat.
Nope.
By August, I was like, I'm done.
Right.
My
Even
wife,
at
I
night.
get home from work and my wife's like, oh, I really like to go sit on a patio somewhere. I was like, I can't think of anything I would rather do
Why?
less
Why?
than that. We have a perfectly good air conditioner right here. But the heat dome, they talked a lot about the heat dome.
Yeah.
What was that?
That's just a giant air mass of really hot, temperatures. I mean, it's kind of like we get stuck in this pattern. We call it big bubble, no trouble in the summer, because you get this giant high pressure system that sets up, and it's actually it acts as a blocking mechanism for any storm systems, right? And high pressure in the summer means hot. High pressure in the winter means cold. It's kind of interesting.
Huh.
And it's just the way it works because of the differing seasons. It's kind of the easy way to remember it. But it just means that heat dome, it just means that it's like at all levels of the atmosphere, and it's over a very large area where you have this blocking mechanism, and it's just going to create really hot conditions.
Nothing's going to get through it. No cold fronts, really. There's not any real cold fronts anyway.
Right.
Really in the, probably US, but nothing's going to get past.
But
that.
even like normal temperatures are tough, because think of that cap as like existing for the entire like 20,000 feet of the lowest 20,000 feet of the atmosphere, and like that's a heat dome. And yeah, I hear you. It's weird because we do hear, oh, this was the worst summer ever, and it was. Don't get me wrong, but I still remember my first summer at A&M. Granted, I was still getting used to.
What year was that, by the way?
I know I'm old. 96. So.
Oh man, that's when I was there. Yeah, that was my first year.
Well, there you Both you guys are old. That's cool.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Well, that was my undergrad.
That's cool.
It was undergrad for me. So.
He's like, oh great, both of you are old. Thanks.
I was in high school, so that's good.
That's all right. My kids weren't even born yet.
So. Yeah, right. But it's a whole different ballgame down there in the Brazos Valley, and the humidity and everything else. Yeah, it was.
I remember that first summer I was there for 30 days in a row. It was over 100, and I'm like, I'm just a boy from Ohio. What's going on here? This is insane.
Why did I come here?
Yeah, why did I come here? I think that was actually the summer in 97, because I started in the fall in 96, and I was like, this is not right.
It's not okay.
No, it's not okay.
Well, and people complain, and I'm guilty of it too. Here in DFW, the humidity is bad. But you go 2.5 hours south,
oh yeah,
it's just unbearable. And then I went further south after that to Houston.
I lived there, yeah.
And Houston, oh my gosh,
13 years. I mean, I'm a sweater. Like, don't get me wrong. I tell people I can sweat in a snowstorm, but like both. Houston, like you come out your door and you're just done. I mean, from the go. So,
and I would assume too, from your perspective, because there are so many various climates in Texas.
It's hard.
I mean, you go to West Texas, it's super, super dry. And then you have some mountains out in Far Big Bend, and then the humidity of the South. Like, I would assume it makes a lot of the predicting difficult to a certain extent throughout the state anyway. It
does. Texas weather's crazy. I mean, as saying goes, if you get sick of the weather here in Texas, just wait a few hours. Right. And so,
is that the size of Texas that makes it such, or is it the topography?
All the above. Because of the size, it expands across everything that you said, from the mountains to it really is a desert out there, to the desert, to the Gulf of Mexico / humid bath that we talked about, to here, where it's kind of in the middle, right? Like sometimes it's humid here, sometimes it's dry, but we're kind of flat. We're in the plains. And so it's just different. It makes and then you got the panhandle where you get snowstorms,
right?
Because it's coming off the Rockies, right?
Yeah.
And so, we've had about 6 different climates just in Texas.
Yeah. At any given time. Right.
Yeah. So it makes it difficult. But at the same time, that's one reason that this area, and we've touched on it a couple times now, is prone to hail and severe weather, is because all those elements kind of converge here. Like you talk about the dry line, it's not as big of a player necessarily here, but sometimes you'll hear that on the local, weathercast, right? Like it just depends on how far that dry line out west, makes it here. And all the dry line it's just a difference in moisture profile. So like you hear the dew point temperature, right? So the closer that dew point is to the actual temperature, the higher the humidity. It feels like yesterday, right?
Yeah. God,
it was disgusting.
Miserable. I was on the roof and we were all just miserable.
Yeah. So like say it's 80 degrees and you have a dew point that's 75 degrees or lower 70s, that's gross. And that's like what it was yesterday. Well, out west in West Texas, they've got dew points in like the 40s. Like that's a 30-degree difference in your moisture content. So that's all it is. That dry line sets up a lot of times out in West Texas, where you're transitioning from maybe a moist, atmosphere here in North Texas or Southeast Texas usually, versus the desert in West Texas. So you'll just get that, and storms fire up along that dry line because of what I talked about. You get the difference in temperature, and you get a convergence zone, and storms are able to form. And they just tend to march west to east because of just kind of weather patterns generally go in that direction.
And I think that's interesting. We talk about it a lot. So whenever we go to inspect a roof, typically we're looking on the west and southwest slopes. Yeah. That's always where the majority of your damage is. So that kind of helps. I was going to ask that question as, why is that? But you're kind of saying that's just how it all works and how it flows.
Yeah. And also just weather 101, like when you see things on a weather map, again, like on a TV newscast or something, you see the L's and the H's, the low pressure and the high pressure. Well, around a low pressure system, winds circulate around counterclockwise here in the northern hemisphere. And we could get into a whole reason why that is, but just trust me on this one.
Brian's coming back like once a quarter.
I know, right? I'll draw on the whiteboard next time.
Absolutely.
But because of that counterclockwise, that's how it like pushes things from west to east, right? Because it's circulating counterclockwise and it's pushing things from west to east. So most of your weather that you see is associated with a low pressure system, and you usually get your fronts that branch out from the center of those lows.
Yeah.
So.
All right. So I'm going to start digging into hail a little bit.
All right.
Obviously, that's what we like to talk about.
Hell yeah.
Hail yeah.
Never heard that one, right?
That's probably what we should have named this podcast. Hail yeah.
I mean, trademark, give me some kudos. Man.
There you go.
So DFW is one of the biggest markets in the United States for hail, in which you've described pretty well as to why that is. Denver is another one. So I'm curious though, obviously we've got Tornado Alley where stuff fires off, but when you talk about hail, Dallas Fort Worth is the spot.
Yeah.
One of the spots.
Yeah.
Denver very similarly. What is it about these places, outside of your Tornado Alley, which we don't see tornadoes like you do in Oklahoma essentially, but what is it here that makes this such a prone spot to have 7,000 roofers
right?
in the DFW area?
Especially in the springtime.
Yeah.
Well, number one, you have population here, right? We talked about this earlier.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Where you could have hail out in the middle of nowhere essentially, and doesn't matter, right? If a bear does in the woods, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So part of it is it's giant population, but the bigger part weather-wise is kind of like what I talked about earlier. All the ingredients that are required for hail is the same that's required for a thunderstorm. What causes big hail is a strong updraft, meaning those winds that are causing the thunderstorm to grow and grow and grow in altitude, the stronger they are, the harder they fall, right? The bigger they are, the harder they fall. So what causes hail is you get the updraft and it's encountering moisture in the atmosphere. And as it gets higher up in the atmosphere, obviously it gets colder and colder once it gets frozen. And that's what people always say, how can I have ice? It's 90 degrees here. I'm like, not up there. It isn't, right?
Yeah, right.
And so once the air mass reaches that cold air, it starts to create ice. And that's all that hail is. It's just ice, right? And there's a lot of different processes and wind flows within that thunderstorm cloud that are happening. So they're going up and then they're coming back down. And as they come back down, they're encountering relatively warmer air, but it's still what we call super cooled, which means it's right around that freezing level. It's not quite frozen, but it's right around that 32 degrees. So it kind of globs onto the ice, right? And it's getting bigger and bigger. And then it's trying to
updraft is just pushing
exactly.
it up
And then the updraft, and it's just this circular thing until finally either the updraft weakens or the size of the hail gets so heavy that it overcomes the updraft. And it says, I'm done. I'm gonna beat you.
Gravity,
and so
gravity takes effect.
And gravity's a downer, right?
Yeah. Oh man, I like that one. Solid.
That's
dad
meteorology.
Joke. That's a
right
good
there.
joke.
That's
right
a
there.
dad joke right there. So
Let's steal that one.
well, and the joke that I got from this guy when I used to work at NASA, and I'd be like, "Hey man, what's up?" You say that to everybody. He's like, "A relative direction." I was like,
Oh man,
such a nerd joke.
I may use that too.
Yeah,
actually.
I like it. I'm gonna wear my kids out with that. That's good stuff.
This is good.
But yeah, so
we may have a new host on the podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
a new dad joke extraordinaire. But no, so those ingredients come into play because of what I was talking about. You get the moisture coming up from the Gulf of Mexico. So you guys hear about the jet stream all the time, right?
Right.
What is that? All that is basically the winds that are flowing at the jet level, like where we fly jets, which is generally in that 30 to 40,000 foot, right? Then you hear the low level jet, which is actually more important for like severe weather. Well, you need both, but like when you get a really strong low level jet, which is more in that 10 to 15,000 foot level, if we get a strong southerly low level jet, winds are coming strong from the south in that, like I said, 10,000 foot, it's able to pick up all that moisture from the Gulf of Mexico and transport it up here to North Texas, right? And so that's one things that we really look at is, do I have, and if you, I know one thing you're going to ask me, and I'll just get to is like, what are things I need to look out for to know, is this a severe weather day? I talked about one, like sunshine.
Yeah.
Is good. for severe weather. Good for roofers.
Which you wouldn't think.
You wouldn't
No,
think,
right?
right?
I mean,
It's like,
yesterday
it's
seemed
beautiful.
primo.
Yeah. But there was also a lot of clouds, right? There was kind of peaks
Exactly.
of sun, but that's why we had big hail here and not so much there, right?
It's funny you say that. I don't mean to interrupt, but
Please do.
we were both here and we kept looking at the radar all day and we were in and out of appointments. And at one point I was like, both of us, Cody and I were like, I just don't think it's going to happen. And I stepped outside and I saw the sun. And I was like, damn it. It's not going to happen today.
Yeah,
because I saw the sun and I was just like, it's just not going to happen. But that's funny that you say that that's actually needed.
It's actually like the calm before the storm, almost like a hurricane where you're like, oh man, this is beautiful weather.
I think, was it last year? I'm trying to remember where it was. They all kind of run together, but I remember people saying there was nothing happening.
Yep.
It didn't even rain. And all of a sudden it's just hailing.
Hailstorm.
Which, I mean, goes contrary to everything that you would think.
Yeah. Well,
until today.
Right. And so, and then the other thing I was going to mention with the low level jet is if you look up in the sky and say you have some sunshine, which is great, but you also have some clouds. What are those clouds doing? The lower clouds, right? I'm talking about. So like the kind of like the puffier, cumulus or stratocumulus, the ones that you can tell are lower in the atmosphere. Are they screaming? Are they moving fast? That means that low level jet is strong. And that's definitely a severe weather day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because you'll see the big, I don't remember all the names of the cumulus that are just kind of sitting and they seem to be growing or whatever, but you want to see that stuff pressing through.
Yeah. You want to see like there's a mass of lower clouds that are just hauling. And that means, like I said, that low level jet is just pushing those lower level clouds. And again, if it's coming from the south, that's even better because it's transporting all that moisture up from the Gulf.
Okay.
So,
all right. So this is not a question that we talked about, but you see it a lot in pictures is like kind of that green color in the, in the horizon or whatever. And they say that's typical of hail, or so I've heard. Is that right? Wrong?
It's typical of tornadoes, actually.
Oh.
And so that's definitely like, but a lot of times tornadoes have hail associated with them, right?
Right.
It's not always, but it's a good majority of the time. If you have a tornado, you're also going to have hail with it. You can have a tornado that doesn't have hail, but it's actually on the lower, end of the spectrum. So technically as a roofer, if it's green, it's probably hail, but it's also like, there could be a tornado associated with that too. And trying to explain why it's green and we'll skip that for another
episode. We're going to do this again. We're probably going to do this a lot. We're going to mark you down for every minute. Okay. So last year, Eric and I talked a lot about this. We saw giant hail here in Mansfield over on the country club specifically. And it was big and it was actually doing some damage to cars and soft metal type stuff, but we would get on the roof and there really wasn't any damage to speak of. But we talked to, I think Eric spoke to someone specifically and he said it was like a snow cone.
Okay.
It would hit the ground and it would just
dissipate.
So what would be something, I mean, I understand the process now much better, but what's something that would prevent it from being hard like you typically think of hail as compared to what he's talking about, where it's kind of like a big glob of snow essentially hitting the ground?
So in that case, what happened was you had big hail, but maybe so we talked about updrafts, right? So you have the downdraft, which is what's bringing the hail down, along with, we talked about the big size they were to overcome that. What probably happened there was the downdraft speed probably wasn't as strong as like a typical large hail event for whatever reason. And so because it had more time to come down in the atmosphere, it had more time to melt, right?
Okay.
And so it was encountering more warm air. Whereas typically in large hail situations, you get a strong updraft and a strong downdraft. And we're talking 100 mile an hour. Like it can measure up to 100 miles an hour or more. So obviously you don't want to be out in that. That could cause serious damage to you or property. But usually you get a pretty equal balance, but that could have been a situation where it was a weaker downdraft. So again, it had more time to encounter that warmer air and be more slushy.
So when it was up high, everything's going as it should be, but it just had a long time to fall. Essentially.
Well, and I know that'll be hard for the tens of viewers that we have here, but this is,
hey, we're up to 20 now.
This is a picture of what we got from a customer. And he was like, this is kind of this space age looking, I don't know if you can see,
it's pretty cool
space age looking hail here, but And then he also had this view here.
Oh, wow.
But there wasn't much damage.
Right.
And so what would cause this? Is this the melting of it as
Yes.
it comes
So
down? So it's
I'm assuming the picture you're showing is the one that's all spiky and
Yeah.
wild looking.
Yeah.
So you'll see that, but then other times you'll see it. I mean, it looks like a golf ball or
right,
a baseball
yeah.
or whatever. So yeah, what's the difference there?
So the difference is, I kind of touched on it earlier, but there's a lot going on in that cloud, right? You got updrafts, you got downdrafts, you got side drafts, but seriously, you got the winds circulating in all these different directions. And so sometimes when you get that super cool water globs on to the hail and it's a nice round thing and it's not getting much of that maybe kind of horizontal winds, then you'll get a nice round ball to it, which is most of the time. But in that spiky situation, you probably had a lot of different winds coming from the side and kind of chunking into it.
okay.
And so it really is just a lot of different thermodynamics that are going on up there. Fancy word, $10 word right there. But it's just the different winds and how it's encountering that hailstone, which causes it to be different shapes and sizes.
Is there a certain distance wise or height within the atmosphere that hail is formed, or is it within a certain range, or is it, how does that work?
Yeah. I mean, it's always has to, get up to freezing level, which varies from day to day. But I'm trying to think what a typical freezing level would be. Probably anywhere from like 15 to 25,000 feet up into the atmosphere. I mean, it's got to get up there to get frozen, right? So you've got to have that strong updraft to even get that moisture up to the freezing level. And then the higher it goes, even up to, 30,000 foot, you can get those 40,000 foot super thunderstorms. You're going to just get colder and colder and get more and more. So that's why the strength of that updraft is so important for the hail size.
Okay.
And so that's, and I know it's like, well, how would I know that as just a roofer trying to figure it out? It's like, you probably don't.
Yeah.
It's really some of those indicators I talked about, that low level jet, with those clouds humming, and really just, is it sunny? That means we're getting that temperature differential. So it just kind of helps with some of those ingredients that might lead to large hail.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I do want to talk about where we kind of traded text on this yesterday about, what's some of the good technologies, which I do want to get to, but something, and I mean, obviously we have no idea what we're talking about, but we watch storms blow in from the west almost always. And you'll see them when they get close to DFW, they'll start to split. And yesterday, same thing, right? You had the section that went down to like Granbury,
Lipan,
Cleburne, but then you had the group that went up to like Sherman and that way. What is it about this area that causes that? Somebody said it's all the concrete in the area with airports and roads and
DFW,
such that creates a temperature differential. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah. I mean, we don't have a definite answer. I'm not aware of any research that says, oh, absolutely, it's because of, the roads versus the grass or, pastures, whatever. But I mean, it just makes sense from a physical standpoint that if you're able to maintain kind of that same temperature difference that happens out in the country, so to speak, that you're going to be able to maintain the storm. Whereas if it hits, a different temperature, because when we measure temperatures in what we call the concrete jungle, right? The urban areas versus the suburban areas, or even the rural areas. I mean, you can see a 10-degree difference in temperature because the concrete is just going to absorb that heat much better than the grass ever would. And so a lot of times that's why you see it, right? It's hanging out, it's over here, there's grass, there's trees, and it's able to maintain itself. Well, then it encounters a different air mass and it's like, poof, right?
Changes the whole.
Because like a thunderstorm actually creates cold air. You ever feel that, right? You're like, whoa, what is that cold air?
Oh, yesterday was.
Yeah. And so it's actually creating a cold air outflow, like flowing out from the thunderstorm. And so if it's able to stay in a relatively cool environment, it can almost feed itself, right? Whereas if it hits that warmer air mass, I know we talked about it's good to have that temperature differential to like create the thunderstorm, but once it's started, that's going to actually kill it. And so that's kind of one way to explain why that might be happening.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So and I think we've already touched on this to a certain extent, but like every time we see that giant hail, the baseball, bowling ball style stuff that will fall through one random house, it's in the rural areas. So I think that kind of talks about what we're dealing with here, but it's always out in the country. We will get big hail here. We talked about, Wiley, and I think it was 2015 where it was actually busting through the deck all the way into people's garages and breaking out windshields and stuff like that. But that seems to be much less frequent than it would be, out west, near we talked, I think it was Burke Burnett. I want to say it was the world record, hailstone. And that's essentially what we're talking about here. Or is it, like we said too, is it, we just have access to that information and it's more populated here. So
I think it's a little bit of both. I think as we expand our footprint with, getting into the rural areas and building homes, we'll probably start to see
more hail,
more big hail. Of course, we'll still have that concrete jungle, so to speak, but it won't be like a metro area where you've got, 8,000 highways, right? So I think as we expand, we'll probably start to see that big hail maybe in the suburbs as much. Not to say we can't have it in DFW proper, but I think, like you said, like we've been talking about, it's certainly not as common, than it would be like out in the rural or even suburban areas.
So frequency of storms, I know a little off topic for meteorology, but from an insurance perspective, right? The insurance companies right now are gun shy to write new policies because of the active weather systems here in DFW. There's a number of things changing in that. So I'm sure they're probably paying very close attention to predictive analysis that you guys are doing. So I don't want to get into political global warming or anything like that necessarily, but do you see changes in the area, with regard to frequency and things like that? Is it on the uptick, or again, is it just access to information and we're more versed or seeing it more so now?
I think it's a combination, right? So regardless of your political beliefs, there's data that proves the planet has been warming the past 100 years on average, right? And so because of we've got warmer temperatures, that mean and again, that's surface temperatures, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't necessarily translate to the entire upper atmosphere, but the more of a temperature difference you're going to have maybe a little bit higher frequency because of what we've talked about earlier with that instability in the atmosphere. I've got warm here, cold here. So you're going to have maybe a little bit higher frequency, the warmer on average that the planet gets. And again, this is not a political thing, but the other factor that is just there's just more people, right? And there's just more ways to communicate. We have our social meteorologists, and we have just people reporting on weather and just news in general 24/7, right? Where we might have had a hailstorm that hit Granbury 20 years ago, and either no one lived there or there was no one there to report it properly to the weather service or to roofers or to anybody to let them know that, like, hey, I got hail damage, because it was like, I'm just Farmer Joe. Like, who cares? I'll deal with it.
Right. Yeah. No, that's interesting because, again, we deal so much with insurance and the changing landscape that is, but most of it, or a lot of it, has to do with hail damage. I mean, of course, down on the coast in areas like that, tornado or hurricanes rather affect a lot of that. But here recently, we've had so many major weather events. I mean, outside of hail, right? We had snowpocalypse and all this sort of stuff that it seems like a big deal at the time. And it is, obviously, from a financial standpoint and the impact that it has on homeowners. But I mean, you think back, what was it? The big hurricane that hit Galveston, the worst catastrophe, I think, in U.S. history, what killed like 8,000 people from a weather-related event.
1900, yeah.
So, I mean, it's been going on for a long time, but to your point, it's just more information and more people are impacted now, potentially.
Yeah, and in that case, we've done a lot to mitigate, right? They built the seawall in Galveston, which protects, in general, people from that giant storm surge that they didn't even know about either, because they didn't have the data to let them know, by the way, there's a giant hurricane that's about to pummel you. So we've done a lot of mitigation efforts to combat the fact. I mean, it's weather. It happens. It's Mother Nature. Like I said, she's undefeated. And so you ain't going to change her mind, right? So you got to do what you can to mitigate the impacts.
Well, yeah, and like you said, yes, you're guessing, but what you guys do, I think it's so valuable to us. I mean, yesterday, as a matter of fact, my daughter's a new driver, and they had an event they were going to along with my wife, and I'm sitting there watching the radar. I'm like, this is not a good idea.
Yeah,
like y'all need to come home. And granted, it missed us,
Right.
Barely though, right?
Barely.
I mean, it's just
seriously.
Right there.
Better safe
But
than
if we were
sorry.
in Granbury or something like that, I mean, it could have been really bad. So the information that's out there from what y'all do, and I'm sure that's only going to get better. It's pretty incredible.
I hope so, or I'll be out of a job.
Okay. So here's a random question. AI, has that infiltrated
Absolutely.
what you guys are doing? Is it good? Is it bad for your job? Like what does that look like?
It's evil. It's going to take over the world. It's like the Terminator.
It's going to control the weather patterns.
No, so AI, so artificial intelligence, ML, machine learning, it's starting to become more prevalent in the weather business. We've actually had aspects of it for the past probably 20 years, but it was more on the like very training wheels side of the house. Whether it's good or bad, I think it's actually really good, because it might take the human out of the forecasting part of like, I don't get to be as hands-on with the forecast perhaps because this machine can do that part for me, but it can do things a lot faster at a higher resolution. And so me as a meteorologist, though, I can look at that machine and say, is that real? Right? It's only learning what it's not as smart as a human, even though it's pretty smart. It's pretty amazing. But you still need that forecaster in the loop, we say, to interpret the data to say, is this even realistic? Right. And how do I apply that and serve like an emergency manager or the public, or whether it's private, I mean, we have those public-private partnerships, but how do I say, I'm going to translate this into something actionable, right? And so I think it's just going to take us to a whole new level of accuracy when it comes to weather forecasting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Another question I have a million questions.
Yeah.
I can keep going.
I got a million of them.
Does it feel like we're going fast?
I'm enjoying this. Hopefully I'm not boring your viewers here.
No. I'm captivated by it.
Well, my two viewers are here.
Yeah, and my mom is really enjoying it.
Yeah, I guarantee it. Yeah. So when you and I talked, well, let's go ahead and go there. So I asked you yesterday, what do you feel is the best weather tracking app for private guys like us to really watch to help determine production schedules or potential hail events or just weather events in general? So
Okay.
I'll let you expand on that.
All right. So first, let me say I am not able to promote a certain app as a National Weather Service employee.
Yeah, no doubt.
So this is Brian Hoeth speaking as a citizen of the United States of America. But no, there's tons of apps
That's what
out
you
there.
call a covering your ass statement.
Yeah,
Is that what
exactly. Disclaimer.
Yeah.
But so it depends on what you're talking about. Do I want an accurate like 3-day forecast? In that sense, I know this sounds corny, but the National Weather Service forecasts really are the most accurate. We don't have an app. We just don't. I wish we did. Your tax dollars need to be higher.
Drop that in the
Apparently.
suggestion box.
Yeah, believe me, we've heard it once or twice.
Eric is happy to increase his taxes to fund that.
We'll take it straight out of his check.
There you go.
So I do recommend using our website, even though it's terrible. I tell people it's the best forecast, but the worst website ever invented. Most of our good data is at least 3 clicks away. But you can go to weather.gov, G-O-V, not weather.com, because that's the weather channel. But if you go to weather.gov, right, on your internet browser on your phone, there's a little box in the upper left-hand corner. You can just type in your city name and state, or you can put in your zip code. I know this sounds like a lot of work, but it's just upfront work, right? Once you do that, it'll give your local forecast, and you'll notice it's a lot different in some cases than like your Weather Channel app, as far as the numbers are concerned with like rain chances and such. Plus, it will also link you to that local National Weather Service forecast office that I was talking about, that they have amazing graphics like timing, impacts, probabilities. It's for the local area. You're not going to get any better than it. I can guarantee it. And that is not just me because I am a weather service, but they are watching your local weather way more than a weather channel that's in Atlanta and is using a lot of just AI and not QCing. Right?
Is that the
So-
big difference when you look
Oh,
at,
absolutely.
WFAA or somebody like, which
Well,
we watch the WAP.
yeah, I
because
mean,
it's easy and it's,
And
you know,
actually, I mean, the WAP's good, and the local TV stations, I'm not here to knock them,
no.
but in many cases, they don't really have the time or resources, for that matter, to be as accurate as the Weather Service. They got a whole team of folks over there that, I mean, it takes an army, to really like dive deep into the forecast, constantly be interrogating the data, updating it, a lot, very frequently. And so anyways, back to that. Once you get that local forecast page, just kind of bookmark it or keep it open in your browser history. And as far as the local forecast, you can't get any better than that.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to like radar stuff and tracking real-time data, I was telling you yesterday, again, not an endorsement, but Radar Scope, if you want to be nerdy, and every single Weather Service meteorologist probably has this app too. It's the gold standard when it comes to radar interrogation.
And that's an app, you said?
Yeah, that one's an app. It's called Radar Scope. And you do have to pay for that one, but it's like $10 a year. I mean, so anyways, it's pretty affordable for what all it provides. And that has not just like the reds and greens and stuff that you see on the TV, but it's got all these like nerdy other products. Now, a lot of people in the general population don't know what all those are, but I'm willing to come back and maybe do a tutorial on some of them. But the one I sent you yesterday is called a hydrometeor classification product.
That's
which
what I
sounds
told Cody
super
that it was.
fancy.
I
Oh
told
yeah, I
him
mean,
when I
you're
saw
like,
it.
you know what? I think we should.
I've got the
look-
t-shirt, bro.
I think we need to look at the hydrometeor
Yeah.
classification product today.
Pull that up real quick.
But it's hydrometeor. You break it down. Hydro is just water, right? And meteor, it's not a meteor coming down. We're called meteorologists. Meteor comes from the Greek meteorologist or something like that. That means atmosphere. So hydrometeor is just water in the atmosphere.
And we are educating the
I-
masses
right,
today.
right.
I didn't know we'd go Latin.
I know.
Yeah.
So I don't study meteors. I study the atmosphere. But so hydrometeor, I can't even say it. Anyways, that product, like I was saying earlier, it's able to decipher, is that rain? Is it hail? Is it even large hail or giant hail? Like they have it sliced and diced down to that level. And so for you roofers that really want to get down to that level, I mean, that product, I mean, you can get it on other apps, don't get me wrong, but that's pretty amazing.
So on that, and sorry to interrupt you.
No.
I'll just keep going. So we see that a lot, or you hear a lot about it, like 2-inch hail is being reported in Glen Rose, for instance.
Correct.
But which apps, or does this specific app, is that hail in the atmosphere or hail on the ground?
On the ground. So within that app, and again, you can get it in other apps too. You can get it off the websites. We have what's called LSRs, or local storm reports. And those are gathered up by our Weather Service offices from either emergency managers, broadcast meteorologists, even general public now are putting it on social media, and we're able to pick it up. And then we officially send it out as an LSR, a local storm report. That's ground truth, right? So you've got the radar that says, I think this is hail or large hail. And then you have an actual storm report that says this is giant hail at 2 inches, 4 inches, whatever the case may be. And so that Radar Scope app has the product, and then overlaid on top of it, it has the ground truth storm reports. So that's kind of cool too, because it's telling you how good is my algorithm in the radar doing. It's doing a pretty good job in a lot of cases.
Okay.
So there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of interrogation, a lot of data out there that we as meteorologists are looking at, but it's free. Well, that one's $10, but there's it's
there's
available.
a lot more expensive stuff out there. For sure.
It's available to you, and so it's pretty neat stuff.
Yeah, no, I think that's great information. I mean,
No.
we're obviously catering to the roofing industry.
Yeah.
So the more accurate information we have,
Right.
the better it is
Yeah.
for all of us.
And from a bigger picture standpoint, I probably guess that you guys look at it, but the Storm Prediction Center, they're the ones that put out the outlook from a national scale, right? And they're the ones that say, oh, we have a slight risk or a high risk or a medium risk. And sometimes, I mean, to be honest, it's a little maybe on the like swinging for the fences, right? I've noticed this year they're kind of over swinging. But what you can extract from their outlooks is they break it down by the individual hazards in percentages. So you can mouse over on their outlooks, and I can provide all this to you after the fact, these websites and things I'm talking about. And it says, all right, translate, what does this slight risk mean to me? Is it hail? Is it wind? Is it tornado? And their percentages say, all right, I got maybe like a 20% chance of hail, only a 10% chance of wind, and only like a 5% chance of tornadoes, which, believe it or not, saying a 20% chance of hail is a kind of a higher percentage,
Really?
like as opposed to like a 20% chance of rain, because the way we calculate our percentages is different. So like in that case for the hail, they're doing it saying a 20% chance of any one hail report within a 25 mile per radius.
Okay.
Whereas a 20% chance of rain is saying like, truly you have about a 20% chance of rain hitting here.
Well, that's right. It's coverage,
I was
right?
going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like it's percentage on mileage that they're talking about. So like our local news, sometimes they're talking about East Texas as well. They're talking about Granbury. It's not talking just, they label it North Texas.
Right.
But it's a pretty big swath. So a 20% could mean anybody in this area might get
but
some stuff.
We've gotten to the point now though where we will parse it out. So we'll say like there's like a 40% chance in Dallas, but there's only a 20% chance in Mansfield, for example.
Okay.
And so that's why if you go to that like weather.gov page and you go to your local forecast, that percentage you're seeing is for your location.
Okay,
it's not for East Texas. It's not for Dallas. It's a point forecast.
Right there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, like I said, they've got graphics which will show that on a map. Even it's like 20% here, 40% there, and so.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we are over an hour.
Oh my
If you
goodness.
believe it, it went fast, right?
I'm so sorry.
No. So I'm gonna we're gonna do this again without question. But I'm gonna end with this question, unless Eric, you have another one too.
I'm good. Go ahead.
But the number one question we get specifically this time of year, after maybe we've had an event and people have filed claims, is, well, when does storm season end?
Sure.
Never.
It's Texas, right? No,
that's kind of what I say.
Yeah.
So, but I am, in your opinion, roughly, what would you say to that? Because it's difficult because we've had hail events, late fall, what?
So we have two primary severe weather seasons within the season. You've got March through about June, peaking at this time of year. April, May is your peak, and that's the time of year that we get the most hail. You guys probably know that. But so March through June, once we get into the dog days of summer and it's like 95 to 100, you could pretty much cut it off for a couple of months or so. And then we pick back up in the fall. So October through about December, believe it or not, we get these get these Christmas Day hailstorms, tornadoes. Like, what the heck is happening? But it's those transitional seasons where you've got the temperature differences with, the warm and the cold. And so
why is that though, primarily the spring? Because you get a lot of that in the fall. And yes, we do get some storms in the fall, not nearly as many hail events, if any. And what's the difference there?
Well, the difference is, so you get that the warm, moist air, like we talked about at the surface, and the cooler, dry air in the upper atmosphere. That setup is definitely a lot more common in the spring. You get a lot more of those fronts. You get a lot more of those temperature differences. The ones that happen in the fall are typically kind of the other way around, where you get maybe some cooler air at the surface and the warmer air aloft. So you're still getting that temperature difference, but it's a different setup. And so that's kind of the difference between the two severe weather seasons there. You're still going to get the hail, but you're going to get those stronger updrafts and the bigger temperature difference in the spring. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it was funny, again, people asking that question last year. We got a hailstorm on I think it was June 12th, something like that. So
it's pretty late. Yeah. I mean,
and
typically
it was a big storm, but it was the one we talked about that had the softer hail.
Yeah. Yeah. So in general, the answer, the long story longer, the answer to your question is, I mean, you're usually done by, mid-June. I mean, in general, and then you're just miserable in the summer, right? And it's just, you're praying for rain at that point.
Seriously.
And so that usually goes through about mid-September. So you've got a good 3-month period where you hardly ever get hail. I mean, you get the one-offs here and there, but and then you pick back up maybe in October with the possibility of, but this is really prime time, as y'all know, the spring.
Yeah. We're always waiting. Every day
every day's
don't know what you're going to get. So.
Yeah, me neither. I, like I said, professional weather guesser.
Well, you're doing good. And the information today, I find it so fascinating. And I know we could deep dive into a lot more stuff. But yeah, anything you kind of want to end it with today until we come back and do this again?
I just want to thank y'all. This has been fun. And, you know, one of the things that we as meteorologists try to wrap up with is just weather safety tips, right?
Yeah.
Like just keep up with your forecasts. And, you know, when you get those warnings on your phone, just really take them seriously. I know a lot of times you'll get a warning and you don't get anything at your house and you're like, they don't know what they're doing, but it really is better to be safe than sorry. Sure. So take it seriously, and especially those tornado warnings, and just seek shelter, you know, and what that means is get to an interior room where there's no windows. And again, better safe than sorry. And I know we all want to go outside to see the tornado, but I mean, I'll probably do that, but no, it just, it really is. So
you know which way it's going.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I just try to really hit that home, that safety is really important, and not freaking out, right? Like my daughter, I mean, God bless her, but she just really gets scared whenever there's any weather. And I just try to tell her, like, there's no reason to freak out. Just have a plan, right? So when you got to watch a tornado watch, that just means that conditions are right for potential tornadoes. Doesn't mean you're going to get them, but that just means pay attention to weather more today than you would like on a day where you don't have a watch, right?
Yeah.
But when you get that warning, like I said, that's when you really need to take it seriously and get off the roads. You know, maybe you pull over and get to a gas station or something. Just get inside and get safe.
Yep. Awesome.
Yeah.
Great information. Yeah. Brian, truly can't thank you enough. Been excited about it for a long time. And I feel like it lived up to my standards. So, so really, really appreciate you. And we will absolutely be doing this again.
Oh, good to hear.
So, yeah. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks everybody. We'll be seeing you soon and much more frequently now that we got the new digs set up. So thanks to Brian Hoeth, Eric Whitfield, and we are out of here. See you soon.